Well, we listened to stories of your days in Greenland dock, the barges full of rough goods when you've been on a job and knock, of pockets full of money earned for sitting on a barge, and how you are a race apart from people by and large, of hours you spent in cafes, pubs, of woodbines, tea and toast, of turned up jeans and hobnail boots from guide on the winning post, of all the barmaids that you pulled, if only in a dream, of nights spent on the mucking when the tub's rolling out of steam. The ballad of the landslide man, the ballad of the landslide man.
I can honestly say that you'll probably hear the same from other lightsmen. I never had a morning where I woke up where I got up and thought, oh, another day at the office, you know. Used to love it. Couldn't wait to get there.
Thinking about it, I'd have done it for nothing really, because I enjoyed it so much.
It was a community within a community. Everybody knew of one another. You went to meals together, you worked together.
It's drilled into you how important you are on the river and how important the river is. And to the guys on the River Thames, they are better than Wayne Rooney is at football. You know, they are complete masters of what they do, and they think that is the best job in the world. There's not a better job in the world for them.
A lighterman has charge of barges that convey cargo from ships to wharves and vice versa, and a waterman technically takes passengers in a boat on the Thames. But most of the men that worked on the Thames had both licences.
And the thing is that about lightermen is that they were vital to the movement of cargo. You had loads of wharves all the way along the river. To get the cargo from ships to where it needed to be so it could be distributed, you needed to use barges, and it was really clever. Just as the Romans did, they used the tides, the 2 tides a day, to use the power of the river to shift things around. That's what lightermen were good at.
When I came afloat in '56, it was very, very busy. There was somewhere in the region of over 100 lighterage companies, probably between 4,000 and 5,000 lightermen.
When I first started, all the docks, St Catherine's Dock, London Docks, Surrey Docks, West India Docks, Royal Albert Docks, Tilbury, everyone was full of ships. When you went in there, whatever day you went in there, they were full of huge seagoing ships, hundreds of barges loading cargo from the ships. All the wharves along the river, almost from Waterloo all the way down past Erith, Greenhithe, every single building on the riverside was either a wharf or a barge yard, or a building connected with the commerce on the river.
And they called the river the larder of London, because all the warehouses, there was Hayeswolf, they had butter and cheese and eggs, and then further down there was tea and coffee. So all along the river there was all food stuff that, well, fed not only London, half the country, I would think.
The company I worked for had a big fleet of what we call insulated barges. They were the barges that carried butter, cheese, meat and things like that. And then they had fleets of general cargo barges, which were just ordinary hatch barges. Then they had fleets of barges that carried tea. And the tugs run like trains. A tug would pick up 6 barges from Tilbury, and 3 hours, 20 minutes later, it would be in London. And that's towing about 2,000 tonnes.
And when we used to tow down to the docks, You could be waiting outside a dock 12, 14 hours to actually get into the dock because the locks was continually working with ships and ships coming in and going out.
There was people rowing barges about, you know, there was ships coming in, there was ships on buoys in the River Thames with barges alongside loading cargo.
It was very polluted, very polluted. There was so much industry along the Thames, gasworks, ironworks, chemical works, and they all put their effluent into the river. Then you also had the sewage system, which used to come into the river, and the ships used to discharge into the river.
To be born in London around that time, if you wasn't related to someone on the river, you knew someone on the river. You had to. There was 25,000 dockers. There was 6,000 lightermen all running around the city of London.
I mean, you don't realise that docks employed thousands and thousands of people, not just lightermen, not just dockers, clerks. They employed their own police force, the customs. Even outside the docks, all the pubs made a living from people who worked in the docks, all the greengrocers, the paper shop, all the little shops, they all made a money.
Los Lightridge and the communities that work in the docks, dockers and stevedores, all lived around the East End, which was Silvertown, Poplar, this side of the river, and then you had Rotherhithe and Shadwell and Greenwich on the south side of the river.
I was overlooking the Thames, so I could, I could see the boats and the barges and tugs every day. And I could, laying in bed at night, I could hear all the horns from the various vessels and the coal ships mooring up just outside where we lived. We also played on the river at low tide. We spent a lot of time up and down the shore at low tide. So it was a big factor in our lives.
During the war, my grandfather used to go and watch cricket in Greenwich Park, and I didn't like cricket when I was your age. So I used to go and sit by a Wolfe statue, and you can look down onto the Naval College, and I used to sit there and look at the river rather than watch the cricket. So it drew me to the river, if you like.
My father worked on the river. He was a lighterman, and I can remember he would go out on perhaps a weekday and I wouldn't see him for a couple of days because they worked with the tide. They brought the boats down the river on high tide to the warehouses, and then they were taken back on high tide again once they were unloaded. So sometimes it'd be a couple of, even 3 days before he came home.
Incredible. I used to go with my father when I was about 4 years old. I used to go with him at any time I could go. Because he used to get up, if he got up in the morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, even whether I was at school or not, I used to get up with him. And if he was in a hurry, he never used to have a breakfast, he never had time. He used to have what we called a Bombay oyster. That was a raw egg in vinegar. And if he didn't have time to drink it, I drank it.
My father and my brother used to take me with them sometimes on school holidays, on the Thames, on their tugs and so on. So let's say the Thames is in the blood. If you did a blood test, there would be Thames water in it somewhere.
But I always wanted to be a lighterman because the granddad and right back through the years, they'd all worked on the river.
I've had 7 uncles worked on the River Thames. The Learys all come out of Bermondsey. My father was one of the Learys, and my uncles, I say, all worked on the river.
I got all the paperwork from Waterman's Hall of who apprenticed who, and it goes right back to 1692. Apprentice, father to son, father to son, father to son.
World War II, a lot of men went from the river because of their skills in handling like invasion barges and those sort of things, because they had those skills and working in shallow water, a lot of them were made a lot of use of by the services.
In 1940, in September, when the Blitz began, where all these lightermen were working was the main target of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. They could easily pick out that bend in the river where the Isle of Dogs is and target those areas. But those men went to work every day to keep all of the vital goods and services flowing into London that had to. They couldn't just not turn up for work.
Because the Thames was an important part of the war, carrying cargo, emptying ships. It was very, very dangerous with all the mines, because we had mines along the River Thames, and a lot of young lightermen and watermen were killed while they were working.
My father didn't want me to follow in his footsteps, and what he did, he said that if I was insistent on becoming a lighterman, then during my last 2 years' summer holidays, 6 weeks, I had to go to work with him every day. And if I hadn't had enough of it by the end of 6 weeks, he would apprentice me. So that's how I became a lighterman.
When you come afloat, no one asks you your name. They just, when you tell them your surname, they say, "Oh, you so-and-so's boy?" And you say, "Yeah, no," and that's how it sticks. So if his name was Jack, your name's Jack. So my father's name wasn't Jack, it was his great uncle was Jack.
There was a lot to learn, hence the length of the apprenticeship. Most of us did 7 years.
The first thing we had to do is go and join the trade union. They wouldn't let you go to the job before you had to go to a place in Poplar. It was the Watermen, Lightermen and Tugmen Bargemen's Union, and had to join this trade union. And our men on the water used to call it the pie shop. It was an old, I don't know if it was an old pie shop, but that was near the West India Dock.
When I got apprenticed, which they sadly don't do anymore, in Waterman's Hall, which I'm sure you're aware of, it's got 500 years of history, that Waterman's Hall. I remember I got apprenticed, I was 16, and I had a three-piece suit on and I was sweating hot. And it was a red hot day and none of the windows would open, and you're in this grand hall in the city of London. And I've got these 12 other scared kids next to me with their masters behind them, these great big hairy blokes, and I'm thinking, oh God. And I'm standing there, and then you've got the court in front, you've got the beadle with his big gold chain around his neck, and you've got all these light, and all hemming, and you know, the water and the tyres and that, and we're just petrified, and you're thinking, right, I'm going to get about 14 years.
They ask you, you know, why you want to be a waterman or lighterman, right? And so you've got to be a good boy and not. One of the things on the light was not to haunt taverns or playhouses and listen to your master, you know, to be like you would at school, be a good boy. And what happened, you had a document which you signed and the master signed it with his name, and one half stays in Waterman's Hall, one half goes with you.
I went home when I was about 15, maybe 15 and a half, and I said to my mother, "I've just met a girl today." And she said, "What's her name?" I said, "Deirdre." She said, "That's a German name," because the war was on, see. So I said, I don't know. So she said, "I'm going to tell your father." And she did. And he come home and he said to me, "Either chuck that girl up or I'll tear your papers up," my apprenticeship papers. So I wasn't allowed to have a girlfriend. And as luck would have it for my wife, she was the first girlfriend I had. And she trapped me easy.
After 2 years, you go up for a verbal test, and there's normally about 6 masters up there, and they in turn ask you questions. The 2 years license allows you to tow behind the tug. You become a licensed hand, but you can only do certain things as a licensed hand. After that, after 6 or 7 years, depending on how long your apprenticeship is, you then get your freedom.
As an apprentice, you was at the bottom. You was the runaround for all the what we used to call freemen and the foremen and managers.
When I first went afloat, you had to call everybody Mister, and the foreman was Sir. When you got your licence, you was allowed to call them by their first name. Prior to that, you weren't. You knew your place, you know.
Some of the freemen were good, 90% of them were good, but some of them were a little bit, you know, grumpy.
You lived in fear, actually. There was occasions when the freeman would strike the boys if they didn't get on with their job or do it properly.
And you would be expected to ask questions all the time. If you didn't ask questions, there's something wrong with you. You know what I mean? Because there was so much out there.
Learning the trade in general, you know, that we find your way about, learn where the wharves were, where the different reaches in the Thames were, the bridges, which arch to go through.
I mean, you learnt to throw a rope, throwing a line. You used to practice throwing a line onto a post so that when you went on the tug you could throw the line out without missing the post most times.
Well, the first year of your apprenticeship you have to learn to scrub the cabins of the tug so that when you went off shift it was absolutely spotless.
One of the first things the mate of the tug said to me when I went aboard that morning, he said, "John, can you make a cup of tea?" He said, "Well, when it boils, make it." And we had this big range boiler. We had 2 big kettles there, all blackened with the coal that was burning.
You learn how to row and feather your oars in a waterman's skiff. They're quite heavy boats, but once you get them going, they go quite easily.
So you had to know how to row a barge, because quite often they give you a big pair of oars and say row it from there to there, what they call drive it. And so you had to use the tide and the wind as well. I mean, if you got in a boat and didn't row, the tide would just take you, and it would probably take you in under a jetty or something like that.
And most of us boys used to go 2 days a week to navigation courses where one day it was academic stuff, maths and English, and the second day was all about lighterage and cargo carrying and loading craft and all the documents that go with it. The man there was Ted Hunt, and he was the man that ran the training school. And then in the second year, before you went up for your 2 years licence, then you would then see another part. You would go into the docks with lightermen and watch them load craft and assist with hatches.
You always get your leg pulled by people, you know, that tell you to go and get a pot of green paint to paint the starboard light and things like that, you know, or a bucket of revs for the engine. There was, you know, there's always tricks being pulled on you.
They used to have cheese and wine tasting days, and I'd go to work and I'd go down and Dave and John would be sitting in this dirty old tug with this table, and they'd have like one of them would bring in a bottle of wine and one of them bring in all these different cheeses, and they'd be and I'm going, can't we go and do something? And they'd go, shut up, boy. And I wasn't allowed any of the wine. They'd drink all this wine in front of me and all this fabulous cheese, and I was just sitting there thinking, this is like Oliver Twist.
When I finished my apprenticeship, I became a freeman on the River Thames, and I was able to work from Teddington down to the lower reaches at Lower Hope. I would say it's been about 72 miles, something like that.
They're revered around the world, the London Lightermen and Watermen, because the Thames is so tidal. It's such a pace. It flows at such a pace. These guys were just that I've learnt my trade off. They never stop learning. They never stop learning until they die. But they're awesome to watch, you know.
All these skippers in those days when I was coming up through the ranks knew exactly where someone else was shaping for, would know by the craft that they're towing, where they were going, and there was a great insight. And they would also know by the state of tide whether to expect ships to start coming up, because obviously once the tide started flowing, you would get small ships coming up into the Port of London.
You kept your eye on the barge being loaded. That was what your job was, supervising the loading, that it came out, you know, that you're not going to sink the barge with the cargo you're putting in it, and that it could travel properly, safely, without taking water on board.
It's your job, if you saw the dockers that were going to use hooks or they were not handling the cargo in the way that you needed it to be handled, you had to tell them about it. Well, they were piecework, so the more they did, the more they got. And if you started interrupting, saying, no, I want that done this way, and it slowed them down, you were not going to be very popular, were you?
It was more of a way of life more than a job. And the camaraderie there was brilliant. and still is today.
And then when you was outside the dock, waiting to dock into the dock, there'd be all the other tugs and the barges, and there'd be all your friends that you knew and guys you hadn't seen for a while, and you'd all be chatting and saying, what have you been doing recently or lately?
It's like being with a family all day long, but they're all men. A tug has got kitchens, a galley it's called on a tug. You know, you've got, some tugs are big enough you have your own room, you know, your own cabin, so you can have a sleep if you're working 24-hour shifts.
When we used to load the barge over at Delta Wharf, which is over the other side of the river where the dome is now, a 1,000-ton barge was being loaded. We'd set the chute up and then we'd shoot over to the pub and watch it. It used to take 5 hours to load. So we'd shoot over to the gun, have a couple of glasses of beer, and then we'd go back over and finish loading the barge.
We knew that if there's what pub or the lightmen go to, doesn't matter where up and down the river, you knew what pub or what coffee shop they'd be in.
Just around the corner was this little cafe. Well, I think it was the bottom end of an old house, see? And there was two old ladies, I think they was older than me, in there. And I went in there one day and she said, "Mavis, get the cat off the attic, the man wants his breakfast here." So the cat was a kip on the attic. Right.
The firms used to have what I call Beano once a year, and it was a day when the customs had a holiday, so we couldn't work anyway. But we used to go on get this coach, and had all the men of the firm went to Margate. And of course they carried a lot of beer and all that with them and stopped at nearly all the pubs on the way, and you imagine what state they were probably some of them when they got there. But we used to go to Margate where the old Dreamland Park is now, and spent a day there, and that happened every year.
If we was towing up from Tilbury Dock, which is at near the estuary of the river, we might get a grating which was like a duck board out of the barge, and we'd tie it over the back and get on it and use it as a surfboard.
Another little trick you used to do, you used to go through the bridges, and you'd have 6 barges but 2 abreast, so you got 3 long. Is hang on the bridge and then jump on the last one, get on the first one, and all your things like that, you know.
Yeah, and some of the lads used to get down and play cricket in the hold, you know, and there was a bit of, some of the older men, they used to fight down there quite. They used to have like sort of boxing matches.
Yeah, a lot of pilfering went on. I mean, look, I never done any pilfering, I was a good boy. But it was open to abuse like that. The custom barges, although they were locked down with these locks and these beams going across, but some people used to find a way in them. I mean, I only telling you about some people. And they said sometimes help themselves. You always tell when they help themselves, because the time they got down to the docks, they were flat out drunk.
The company I worked for had all these lovely boats, and I always used to get this rotten old stinking bathtub of a boat. The people, I used to get so embarrassed because I'd be trying to do a guide. The people would be sliding around the boat on these chairs and just moving around the deck. And you'd have little old women just going around the deck in their 80s. Sorry, I'm moving about. And they'd be sliding around, and the window was up there, so none of them could see out the window. And the window was made of plastic, so it was all, you couldn't see out of it anyway. And it'd all be steamed up because the boat would overheat. And Bert used to go, "Don't you ever have a go at this boat? This is a beautiful, beautiful boat." I used to go, "You're mental. This is the worst boat in the world." But it was a Dunkirk veteran. He went over to Dunkirk, and it's a houseboat now. So that goes to show you how much I know.
I used to love it in the mornings, first thing, when we used to get underway, make the tow up, and we'd be going downriver. And you're facing east, obviously, so the sun is coming up, and the glinting on the water, that was nice.
Best part was the summer. And if you're on a long tow, say you run from Woolwich Arsenal, where I used to sail from, round to the River Medway, 6 barges with an underpowered tug, that could take up to 5 or 6, up to 11 hours sometimes. And so you had plenty of time to read. The books that I read in the cabin, when on a long tow like that, you feel free, nothing, nothing to concern you. You know when you get there, you wall the barge up and you get on a train home, or if it's too late to catch the last train, you just simply sleep in the barge or on the tug.
On a brilliant sunny day, where you want to be is over on the barges, because on the barge there's no noise. On a tug you've got a massive diesel engine. So what you do is you go over onto the barges, you get onto the back of the farthest one away from the tug, so it's nice and quiet, and all you can hear is the water rustling under the boat and bubbling as you're being towed along.
The saying on the Thames is at command of our superiors, which is above the crest, and it means, and our superiors are wind and tide. They're your bosses. You get your phone call where to go to work and stuff like that, but that's your bosses, the wind and tide.
Our industry was one of the dangerous industries in the country. In 1959, we lost 19 men between September and Christmas through bad weather, people being washed overboard, or slippery decks, or in one occasion where boys fell over the side and Freeman dived in and to save them.
There was no sense of health and safety at all. There were no life jackets, there were no life buoys, people just didn't think that way. You were expected to look after yourself.
We used to take barges down to Thames Haven, Shell Haven, and sometimes we'd be down in a false 10 or 11 gal. The waves used to come over the barges, and a couple of times in that you used to wash you along the deck and you'd grab hold of something so you didn't go over in the river, like, you know.
Worst days on the river, I suppose, was blizzard, fog, those sort of days, and it was on very wet days, of course. It was pretty dreadful. And I remember my first day in a tug at 14. It never stopped raining all day, and we, you know, by that time, you know, although we had protective clothing, it wasn't quite as good as it ought to have been. And by the end of that day, I thought I'd made a mistake. I'd gone into the wrong profession.
One winter, the Thames started freezing over. All the ropes, when they got wet, went solid. The only way you could undo them was with an axe or a saw.
Not a lot of comfort, if you know. They had a cabin on each barge, but it was only just a bit where you couldn't shelter. But if you got stuck on there, you couldn't get ashore. You get cold, you needed you could find a bit of wood and coal and make a little fire perhaps, you know, and keep yourself warm until the tug come to pick you up.
I was lashing a barge up with a tarpaulin, and the string broke, the lashing, what we call a brace apart, strand of a rope. And I'm pulling the lashing and it broke, and I've gone in backwards and I didn't know where I was. It was dark and I blew. I remember my training at Lightridge School, bubbles. And the bubbles told me where the surface was, because I didn't know where to go to swim to get up. And when I broke the water surface, 2 of them working friends was there, they pulled me out.
In them days, you had to be, if you fell over and they got you, they took you to the hospital and pumped you out because the river was a bit onky-pooky, you know what I mean?
Your idea, the ambition that if you did go in the dock or the river was to get out the dock gates, out the dock, enclosed docks, without the policeman seeing you, so you could go home and have a bath and what have you at home. But if the policemen see you, they took you to hospital.
There was also the danger of ships hitting tugs. Being a much smaller vessel, they were sometimes hard to see at night. The modern poly ropes have an enormous elasticity in them. If they break, they come back and they cut people in half. You've got no chance. So, you know, it's very dangerous out in the river and very dangerous in the docks. Things falling on top of you, falling off of sets, falling, you know, container falls on your head, you're not going to survive.
Loading marble, like sheets of marble like big as that screen, okay? and about that thick, you know, used to put it in the barge, and you could only stand it up. You couldn't lay it down because it'd break, you know. So you had to stand it up. You know, we standing up one day, and it's a long barge, which is a narrow barge, and they're standing it up, and I forget his name now. He's down the hole like helping them stand it up, and the barge is, the weight has put the barge over like that. It's come down, chopped him in half. Chopped him in half, it did. Or they did. There was more than one come down. That was pretty awful. That was pretty horrible.
We belong to a particular trade union called the Waterman, Lighterman, Tugman and Bargemen's Union, and we were basically, you know, pleased and proud to be a member of that trade union. And there was just like a troop of soldiers, we were together as a single body.
We had a small union, and it was run by the men, and it fought to get better conditions and wages for the men, and you felt a loyalty to the union. I mean, when we went on strike, it was 100%.
But most of our disputes were linked up with ports, where there was a national port strike, or there was a national strike in London, and we was caught up in that. Because our employers made sure that we went out on strike, because they're not going to pay you sitting around doing nothing.
I never liked them because I had 4 children for a start, which you had to look after, because if you had no money coming in, you'd had it. You didn't get like you do today, bits of help here and bits of help there. You never got them days, you never got nothing like that, you know?
There was times we didn't do bad, you know. Mostly through overtime and working long hours, really, but the basic money wasn't very good. Basic pay wasn't all that clever.
As lighterman, you could start at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you could be working till all night, 7, 8 o'clock at night most nights, sometimes right the way through to 6 the next morning.
When you're a lighterman, you do your wage bill, and you had to keep a diary. Otherwise, you'd forget where you was working last Monday, because you'd do one job Monday up the River Lee, Tuesday you might be round Gravesend, Wednesday you might be up towing down from Brentford. You had to write it in a diary, and your time of start and your time of finish.
My dad's company, Humphrey and Gray, used to deal with these huge ships, called CB ships, big floating containers, that when they came in from America, he did lots and lots of overtime. So when he did lots of overtime, he was earning good money. When it was quiet, and he was on basic money, not doing so well. And that used to affect birthdays. Now, my birthday's on February the 11th. My older brother's was on March the 5th. And I can remember one year, it was coming up to my birthday, and I had my eyes on different things that my mum and dad might buy me, but it all depended when the boat comes in. That's an old kind of song they used to sing in the north of England, but it did affect us at that time. If the boat came in, I got what I wanted for my birthday. If it didn't come in, I wasn't going to get it. And this time, this big CB ship, it missed my birthday. My birthday passed and it still hadn't come in. It came in about 2 weeks or so, 2 or 3 weeks after my birthday, just in time for my older brother. And what did he get for a birthday? A brand new Seiko Quartz digital watch. And I was as green of envy as you could possibly be. And I never forget it. But looking back, it shows you how those pics and how difficult it must have been for my mum and dad when 1 week they had good money and then it went down to bad wages.
Everyone, if you were out of work, you went on what they called the pool. Now the pool is like a distribution centre of labour. And they had one place in Ibex House, first of all, in the Minories. They had another place after that down in Prescott Street, which is in the east, like just by Aldgate. And used to go there and used to say, oh, go to Union Library or Whitehare or Brathwaite Dean or Darling, different companies, if they wanted labour. Because it's no good, if you haven't got no work for people, you're not going to keep them on the payroll, are you?
They used to call us the weekend millionaires, because we earned a lot of money during the week, but never got home. At the weekend we had a pocket full of money to spend.
We could earn money, you know, and from the age of 16 I bought a motorbike, and most of my brothers and friends all had, so we had quite a good time really. It was, you had money. We used to sort of go to the little local dance halls.
Dance halls were very popular, particularly for young men, because why? Because there were young women in there, that's the answer to that one. So, most young men like most young women, that's what we spent our money on.
I know that girls in Bermondsey would say that they would go to lightermen's dances because they would hope to, if they could pull a lighterman, they were good earners, they were what was called a good catch.
How did I spend my wages? Not very sensibly at the time. Mainly, most young lightermen were very fashion conscious. So I used to save up, and when I had enough money, I used to buy a new suit.
Well, it was mods and rocker days. I used to like clothes, and I tried to be a mod, but I spent a lot of money on clothes, and I had a scooter when scooters was popular the first time, with my little berry and my fur.
I earned so much money in the end, working weekends, that I was able to spend money in going to the theatre, in a proper theatre box, at a theatre called the Garrison Theatre. And so I saw lots and lots of plays, and it helped me to get immersed in plays, particularly Shakespeare plays. So I was known as Shakespeare when I worked afloat. So I had to carry that burden around with me.
I had various nicknames. When I was very young, when I first started, I was called Smiley, because I was always smiling, I suppose.
Well, I did have a nickname. I had lots of nicknames for all the things I've done. The nickname when I first came afloat was Jack. That was obvious. Because my dad's name was he was called Jack, but as I said earlier.
Believe it or not, in them days sometimes they called me Mophead, because I had a massive hair like that.
As I got on into other things, I mean, it became Union Jack because I was in the union, and became a shop steward and a union officer. Because I was quite often missing from work because of that work, I was then called Lord Lucan because he disappeared, didn't they? Never found him. But they got shortened to the Lord. Starting in the late 50s, the first damage that was done to the lighterage industry was the Clean Air Act, strangely enough, because there were 3 companies that solely carried coal to power stations and gasworks. And so when the Clean Air Act came, coal started to be done away with. And so those 3 companies finished up packing up. That was the first big blow.
The docks have declined because the method of carrying cargo is totally altered. Everything now is put in a great big box that you call a container, and that's transshipped around the world. The ships are much bigger, so they can only go into where there's very deep water.
So the bulk cargo is loaded in by hand in bags, and it's gone into containers, and they was packed in depots around the countryside, not necessarily in the dock. So the dockers were losing that sort of work. And gradually the upriver docks here all closed down. It all moved down. The only one which is still running now is Tilbury Dock.
When the port was starting to run down, they didn't need as many men, they didn't need as many dockers and stevedores and tally clerks, and they didn't need as many lightermen. They then decided to introduce a scheme which was an inducement for people to seriously consider taking severance, i.e. giving up their work on the river for a payment.
My dad's company was taken over by the Kuwaiti Investment Group, and even though his company was profit making, they had no interest in the lightermen at all. They were interested in the property profile. So they made all of the men redundant so they could get their hands on all the important wharves so they could turn them into bars and restaurants.
As I come out of lighterage, our firm went packed up in the 80s. I was allocated as a docker for a year at Tilbury because I was attached to the National Dock Labour Board.
And my dad, who'd been so proud to work on the river, who'd done an apprenticeship for 7 years and loved what he did, ended up as a docker in his 50s. A really tough physical job, driving forklift trucks, and you could see it was a really, and his wages went through the floor.
Now I'm working, I've been on the Woolwich Ferry for 12 years now. It's a good job, the Woolwich Ferry. It's just, it's basically a floating car park. And it goes from North Woolwich to South Woolwich to North Woolwich to South Woolwich to North Woolwich to South Woolwich. It's like that all the time. No one wanted to join the Woolwich Ferry. Everyone was going lightering and going up and down the Thames, and the Woolwich Ferry was saying that old sea captains, people have been out at sea come and done. You know, no one off the river wanted to work on the Woolwich Ferry, but that just shows you the change in the River Thames. That the Woolwich Ferry is one of the best jobs now. It's crazy, isn't it?
My son, who was about 11 at the time, was ever so sad because he had ambitions to become a lighterman, but the fall off of work was so much that it was obviously he wasn't going to be able to get a decent job or a profession out of it.
It's mainly involved in pleasure boats now. There's the refuse, the London rubbish all goes by river, doesn't it? There's some big tugs doing that every day. Rubbish, that part of the industry, it can't be done any better than that way, because you imagine all the lorries that would be on the road when you have a, say, 200-ton barge. It takes a lot of lorries to carry that, and because you've got a big open highway down the River Thames.
Now it's all houses, penthouses and flats, and if they wanted to start the river up again, there's nowhere to put anything ashore because it's all houses, very expensive houses. I miss the river. It was the last thing in the world I wanted to do, to leave it, but you couldn't afford to stop there.
In fact, I went down to the West India dock the other week with a friend. I didn't recognise the place. All the places I knew, gone. All the people that I knew, gone.
It all come from the river, and I just met all these amazing guys that had just done so much. I'd come from a little brat school kid sort of thing, mischievous, not a nasty kid, but a bit mischievous, always having a laugh, to suddenly with these guys, and yeah, and just a wealth of experience, and funny and genuine and honest, and they cared about you. You really get that sense of you belong.
I'm really, really proud of what my dad did and what he did, and I'm aware now it's really part of our family's history, so I'm really proud that I am related to a waterman and a lighterman.
Best thing I ever done. I told you, I wouldn't change it. If I had my life all over again, I'd do exactly the same. Still go work with my dad when I was about 4. Yeah, still do that. It's lovely, lovely life.
I wouldn't have wanted to do any other job. It's been absolutely amazing.
I'm Lighterman Tom at Tilbury Town. I'm known as the Jolly Bargee. No sailoring chap in buttons and cap could teach me a lesson, not he. Why, I've followed this river, this same old river, since I was a youngster of 9. And from Twickenham down to Tilbury Town, they know this old vessel of mine. Well, you may sing of your life ashore, you may sing of your life at sea, with a yo-ho-ho for the winds that blow, but that's all fiddly-dee. I reckon I'm fancy free, and the song for the likes of me is hey for the river, the jolly old river that carries your old bargee.